How did Istanbul survive the earthquake without any loss of life or serious damage? The 6.2 magnitude earthquake that occurred in the Sea of Marmara on April 23 did not cause any major destruction or loss of life in Istanbul. According to official data, 266 aftershocks were recorded following the 6.2 magnitude earthquake in Istanbul. Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change Kurum announced that a total of 1,399 building notifications were received from residents of Bursa, Balıkesir, Tekirdağ and Yalova, primarily in Istanbul, on the day after the earthquake. Kurum said that 7 buildings were found to have minor damage. Minister of Health Kemal Memişoğlu stated that there were no primary injuries in the earthquake. Memişoğlu stated that people who were injured while fleeing due to panic after the earthquake applied to hospitals and said that 60 people were receiving treatment in hospitals. The minister added that there was no danger to life. There have been deaths and destruction in earthquakes of similar magnitude in the past in Turkey. So how did Istanbul and its surroundings survive the April 23 earthquake without any loss of life and without it turning into a major disaster? How will the 6.2 magnitude earthquake in Istanbul affect the fault lines? Experts speaking to BBC Turkish say that more than one factor needs to be taken into consideration to find the answer to this question. Speaking to BBC Turkish, geological engineer Professor Dr. Okan Taysuz, a member of the Science Academy, stated that the first of these is the distance of the earthquake's epicenter to the city. According to AFAD, the depth of the earthquake, which occurred approximately 23 kilometers from Silivri, was 7 kilometers. Taysuz reminds us that the farther away the focus of the earthquake is, the less it affects you. There are no active faults in Istanbul. The faults are in the Sea of Marmara, according to the information provided by Taysuz. The second factor affecting a possible destruction is the magnitude of the earthquake and the length of the fault that ruptured. 6.2 can be considered a magnitude where there is no destruction under normal conditions. The destructive effect has just begun. He says that it is stated that this magnitude is not a test for the quality of the building stock in Istanbul. Speaking to BBC Turkish, Cemal Cik, board member of the Turkish Earthquake Foundation, said, "I think that even in a small or medium-sized earthquake where only 10 kilometers of a fault with a total length of 100 kilometers was broken, a lot of buildings were damaged." Cik, who warned that damage reports based only on notifications made may be incomplete, also stated that some households may not have reported the damage despite the damage. Experts believe that the risk of an earthquake of magnitude 7 and above affecting Istanbul is still alive. According to the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality's update of Istanbul's possible earthquake losses estimates study prepared in 2019, it is expected that nearly 50,000 buildings will suffer heavy or very heavy damage in the event of a 7.5 magnitude earthquake in the city. It is predicted that nearly 150,000 buildings will have moderate damage. Speaking to BBC Turkish, Nusret Suna, chairman of the board of directors of the Union of Chambers of Turkish Engineers and Architects TMMOB Chamber of Civil Engineers, also argues that the earthquake cannot be accepted as a guarantee regarding the condition of the buildings. Suna says that in order for the building stock in Istanbul to be considered safe in terms of earthquakes, it must be ready for earthquake scenarios of magnitude 7 and above, equal to the acceleration seen in a third-degree earthquake zone. According to experts, another determining factor in the destructive effect of earthquakes is the acceleration of the earthquake. Geological engineer Professor Dr. Okan Taysuz defines acceleration as the force applied by earthquake waves to buildings horizontally and vertically. Accordingly, the acceleration of an earthquake is directly proportional to its magnitude and, in most cases, the length of the fault. On the other hand, the weaker the ground, the stronger the acceleration. Taysuz states that the acceleration of the April 23 earthquake was measured at 0.2 g. He emphasizes that this is a very low acceleration that corresponds to a third-degree earthquake zone under normal conditions. The expected acceleration in Istanbul on the earthquake hazard map is 0.6 grams, and buildings need to be built accordingly, he adds. The professor, a member of the scientific board, estimates that it would be impossible not to see destruction in the event of an earthquake with such a high acceleration in Istanbul. Taysus emphasizes that tens of thousands of buildings are at risk of serious damage. We should not be complacent, as the earthquake is over and done with, and there will be no more earthquakes. He warns, Istanbul is no better off than the 1999 earthquake. So what did the earthquake look like in terms of disaster preparedness culture? Experts speaking to BBC Turkish believe that we could have been better prepared. Okan Taysus reminds us that the intense discussions that take place for a few days after every earthquake are soon forgotten. Simuljik, who served as the chairman of the Istanbul branch of the Chamber of Civil Engineers for 20 years, comments that Istanbul is not in a better condition compared to the 1999 earthquake period. Cheek explains this comparison as follows. At that time, Istanbul's population was low, the building stock was not so dense, and there were more green areas. At that time, I was on the 14-person Provincial Disaster Center Board. It had determined 496 assembly areas in the city, but even then it was stated that this number was insufficient. Each neighborhood needed a few assembly areas. Now there are around 60 of them left, and even empty areas have been open to construction. In 2019, the Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency (FAD) announced the criteria taken into consideration in determining assembly areas and announced that there were 2,860 for assembly areas in Istanbul. However, some civil society organizations, including TMMOB, claimed that a significant portion of these areas did not meet the necessary criteria and that 3/4 of the areas determined were open to development after the 1999 earthquake. Following the earthquake, complaints were widely voiced that telephone lines were blocked and traffic was heavy in Istanbul. Minister of Transport and Infrastructure Abdelkadir Uraloglu said in a statement after the meeting held with GSM operators on April 24th that the communication capacity increased to 0.5 times compared to normal during the earthquake. Uraloglu stated that the rate of calls not being answered was determined to be around 25%. Simuljik argues that such a picture is worrying for a possible major earthquake. Fires will break out in many places. How will we be reached when traffic is blocked and phones are not working?